I had a very deep conversation with Dr. Manish Pandit, an astrology researcher and a teacher of simplified rituals. He has worked relentlessly to bring the correct interpretation of our mythology, which is what we spoke about at depth. Since he's a scholar of Mahabharata and is now the author of a beautiful book, we had a detailed conversation on the dating of the war and when did it really happen. He gave me a useful tip on how to relieve oneself of pain through simple mantras. I was curious about how to awaken kundalis, since there are so many of these ads that claim that you can do it in 21 days. And Munishji obviously gave a detailed response on that, which I'm sure you would love to hear. So I hope you enjoy the conversation and keep meditating. So, Pranam Manishi, it's an absolute pleasure and honor to have you on Pragyaan. I've been really waiting for this conversation because of the enormity of wisdom and knowledge that you have, not just on dating the Mahabharata, but also astrology in general terms. And I think what I really liked about everything that you've spoken more generally on the internet that's available is that you give very practical tips on how to address real challenges that we are facing in our lives. And more often than not we see astrology or the Gita or the Mahabharata or really Indian heritage as something that is out there, or it's very complicated. I have to read a lot, I have to be very wise to be able to understand it. But I think the way you put things across is very in very simple terms, so that it can really change my life. And so that's why I'm really looking forward to receiving many of these tips from you today during our conversation, and hopefully our viewers will benefit from it as well. And so I'd just like to open this conversation with something that you shared with me on how people can deal with pain. A number of us are struggling with physical pain, of course, a lot of mental stress. And you shared something that you have discovered in terms of a mantra and some tips. So I'd like to really open with what does that look like? How can people do something to relieve themselves of their pain?
Namaste, Pragya ji, and thank you very much for having me on this podcast. And it's a pleasure to be here. Now, the reason I'm so interested in reducing people's pain, in whatever manner it might be, is because in my day job, I'm a medical doctor. And I've been a medical doctor for more than 25 years, effectively. Um, what happens is, you see, and I'm sure you have seen people like that, and you might have some personal experience of it as well. We all do. And what happens is, life is such a unpredictable thing that when you start walking through life, when you're young, hopefully you're full of life and exuberance, and you're smiling, and then what happens is, you can either meet some people who are extremely toxic, or you can meet situations which are deadly, which are very toxic. And what happens is, if that keeps happening to you, if it happens once or twice, then the person falls down, gets up, starts walking again, and then they get knocked down again and knocked down again. And the problem is, not every human is alike. Everybody has a different pain threshold, a different sensitivity threshold, a different way of viewing the world. And somewhere along the way, some people fall down and they never get up. Or they get up, but they are either paralyzed with the pain, or they have such negativity after that. And I have experienced it myself. I have seen people very close to me deal with it and not being able to deal with it, you know. So that interests me.
Yeah.
That is where I'm coming from. So there are two things. One is, so a lot of the time people, when they become accustomed to the pain, what happens is, start drawing negative energy towards them. It can either be that they have drawn the negative energy to them, or that they actually step into a place where there's negative energy. And in our world today, negative energy is such a powerful thing, because everywhere you go, there is a possibility that there may be some negative energy. I mean, I like to refer to it as negative energy rather than the traditional way we refer to it as bhoot, pret, pishach, brahma rakshas. I mean, you can keep going on in that particular pantheon. If you actually go into for example, the Chandi Kavach is there, it will tell you, the levels of whatever is basically stopped by that Kavach.
Right.
There are so many of those Kavachas, but the problem is they are in Sanskrit. And you have to recite them reasonably well. And you have to take time to recite them. There are numerous such Kavachas. There is the Batuk Bhairav Kavach, there is the Chandi Kavach, there is Shiva Kavach. Shiva Kavach is extremely effective as well. But the problem is, reciting it, I've seen even reasonably experienced people at this make terrific mistakes while reciting it. And it doesn't sometimes then give them the effect. Plus, it requires time to recite. I mean, they are all long pieces. And some people just stop halfway. They're so affected by the negativity anyway, they stop halfway. So the first is to protect yourself from some negative influences. I'll go into that first. So that is the thing which I like to tell everybody is the Sharir Bandhan mantra. And the reason it is actually a Disha Bandhan as well, but it will function as a Sharir Bandhan pretty well, right? And what it is that if you look at most of the tantrikas, I have met huge number of tantrikas in my life, and this comes from a Shabar mantra tradition, right? And the Shabar mantra tradition is a slightly different tradition, that you have a mantra which will work no matter what your physical purity, no matter what your mental state. There is something which will make it work. In this particular thing, there is what it is. I will talk about that. But what that mantra is, let me just recite it a few times so that your viewers, get to hear it. And so what it is Akash bandho, patal bandho, bandho tawa tai, dharti mata to hai bandho, dohai bhairo baba ki. आकाश बांधो पाताल बांधो बांधो तावाताई धरती माता तो है बांधो दोहाई भैरव बाबा की. And what makes this work is this dohai bhairav baba ki. It is working with the power of Bhairav, right? That it is effectively that if this is not done, you have to answer to Bhairav himself. So this is a very powerful mantra. Two eclipses just went by. They were the ideal times to sort of energize this mantra. It is a Shabar tradition mantra. So you repeat it 108 times, same time and same place for 21 days, it will become energized. But if not even, it is a Shabar mantra at the end of the day, it will give some result. I know people for whom 11 times also they repeat it, it is more than enough, right? Wow. So it does give a result. I know people who will repeat it only on Amasyas and Purnimas. So the reason I started giving it out is because I know a few people who were in the midst of depression, having very the ideas of self-harm and all that. And quite a few people are like that nowadays, unfortunately, in this age of ours. You see, what has happened is we have become so slavishly attached to machines, but you have forgotten about the humans.
Yeah.
And what happens is that people then get into the vicious cycle of negativity. And once they are in that cycle of negative thought, anything can happen. So a lot of those people have benefited from this particular mantra.
This is something which is the need of the hour, because even as the last 6 months we've been reading the news a lot in India, and what's been going on is that you've always seen suicides at a all-time high in educational institutes, and now we are seeing many of those rising in a particular city called Kota. Just there's been a massive rise, because one is to what you said, which is just attachment to digital devices, but also just the pressure of life. You sit down and you think about, what if I don't pass, and what does my life look like? And because you can't see a path ahead, you think of the future and cause yourself pain today, and you feel like the best way to get rid of that pain is to really finish your own life. So, this mantra that you have shared is very powerful, and I think really will benefit many people who are going through physical pain, but more importantly, I think medical, mental pain. So, thank you so much for sharing this. And I also want to stitch what you said. You've been a doctor, and just this mantra as well is around life's problems. And as I was researching on you, I found out that the reason you really started to date the Mahabharata was, in one of your sessions in the mess with a number of doctors who came around and told you how they were facing life's problems, and you said, well, you should just read the Gita, that has all the answers. And you had this really young enthu girls stand up and say, well, how am I even supposed to believe that something like this happened? And that's when you really got down to doing this. So I think I really want to talk about your journey of dating the Mahabharata, and then where do you really put it in the cosmic calendar versus the human calendar that we know.
So that's a very interesting thing which you've found out. Yes, that was a long time ago. Interesting thing is that it was a young doctor from Lady Hardinge College in Delhi who was in England, and there was just a random conversation. It was some point in the evening, I think, because we were all on call. It was after work actually, and I think it was a very different time. Even in England, it was a very different time. And there was a conversation going on, and I think, there was a bit of depression. Well, can't progress in jobs or something like that was happening. And so I happened to, as usual, open my big mouth and say, about this thing about the Gita. And the girl actually was very annoyed. She said, well, we are secular people, and we are modern people, and the Gita never took place because Sri Krishna never existed. And well, so if Sri Krishna didn't exist, what's the point of the Gita? And it's a very interesting point, what she made. And I was like, I've never heard this argument before. But then I realized that the younger generation demands scientific proof. And then I started to look into the research on it. And so the interesting thing is nobody actually denies that the Mahabharata took place. They all say the Mahabharata took place. But what varies is to what extent did the Mahabharata take place? Did it take place with all these Akshauhini Senas, so many soldiers and all that? So you got that on one side. And then the other thing is the archaeoastronomy, the field of archaeoastronomy, which had very barely taken off. Remember, the computers of that time were not of that capability, even in the year 2000. They still hadn't come to that point where all this software was just available to anybody who wanted it. And it was NASA which had some of this software. And they used to publish their ephemeris, etc. And there was a particular gentleman by the name of Dr. Narhari Achar. And Dr. Narhari Achar had the singular distinction of being a professor of physics. I think it was material science. But he was also into astronomy. And he was a very thorough person. And first I read his research. And I was quite impressed with it because it was extremely thorough. I don't think I've seen that sort of research coming from anybody else in the field. I mean, even I have only expanded on what he did. And he came from a tradition. So his date was 3067 BCE, 3067 BCE for the Mahabharata. And his tradition came from somebody called as Raghavan, who was also quite a distinguished person, who was in Chennai University as, I think, a professor of mathematics, if I remember right. Okay. And so he had done everything by hand in 1967 or 69. But the difference between the two was that whereas Raghavan had gone into just Kali Yuga, so Kali Yuga has a tradition of starting at 3102 BCE. And that's a very old tradition. It is well known and it's a very old tradition. And there are two or three different types of Kali Yuga, which I won't go into because it will bore your viewers quite a lot. But the thing is that Kali Yuga, normally all these so-called traditional datas of the Mahabharata simply say that Kali Yuga has to start at 3102 BCE and the war must occur 36 years before that. And the only person who had said, well, no, that's not the case, because what's in the Mahabharata is that there is a lot of stuff there saying Kali Yuga has already started.
Really?
Yes. So, Praptam Kaliyugam Vidhi Pratidhyam Pandavascha cha. It says, right? At the time, for example, when Balarama, there is a Gada Yuddha, as you remember, between the two star pupils of Balarama, Bhimsen and Duryodhan. And, when Bhimsen hits Duryodhan on the thighs, against, it's a contravention of the rules of war, because below the belt, so as to speak. Balaram gets very upset and he runs towards Bhimsen, and Sri Krishna stops him and he says, that Praptam Kaliyugam Vidhi Pratidnyam Pandavasya. So Kaliyuga has already arrived, he says. And before also, when Sri Krishna and Karna are riding together, and before that, when the war is taking place, and again there is a seeming contravention of the rules of war when Karna is killed by Arjun when he gets down from his. Even then, you can see there is a multiple amounts of times where it's already here. Kali Yuga is here. And the thing is, if you go even into the Bhagavad Gita also doesn't contravene this particular statement. But what has happened is, people have simply not understood that bit of it. What it is that Sri Krishna's feet, until they are on the earth, till that time Kali Yuga is there, but it cannot take hold completely. It cannot take hold. And then when he leaves, then Kali Yuga starts in right interests, right? And Kali, of course, hides in gold, for example, and things like that. So because all the wars and things which you look at. So Kali Yuga is going to start after that. So yes, so this is not a contradiction in terms. But the only person who realized that was Raghavan. At that point realized that the war must have taken place just after Kali Yuga started. So it's actually the 36 years after, in a way, that Kali Yuga has started. So it's 3067 BC. So the other thing which we have to remember in terms of the dating of the Mahabharata is that you got Balram's pilgrimage, and Balram's pilgrimage has to start from a Pushya Nakshatra and end on a Shravana Nakshatra, and it has to take 42 days. So that is very important. Why? Because Pushya Nakshatra is the most auspicious nakshatra of the Hindu zodiac. And India's independence chart, for example, is also with the moon in Pushya Nakshatra. And if you see anybody, you see the huge full page ads occurring in the newspapers also, even today, where they talk about starting things on a Pushya Nakshatra. So buying gold on a Pushya Nakshatra, buying a car on a Pushya Nakshatra, right? And so on, because it multiplies everything you do. So you do everything on a Pushya Nakshatra except marriage, of course. There are micro markers of astronomy in the Mahabharata. And if you ignore those, you can date the war to 2023. If you ignore them, you can date it to any century, or I would say actually any year. So one characteristic mistake which you will see, if you ask most of the people, you will say, well, you ask them, when did the war start? On what tithi? So if you look into the tradition says it is a Shukla Ekadashi, or Shukla, some people Shukla Dwadashi or Trayodashi even. But if you look at the astronomers, they will say war started on Amavasya. And this is a ridiculous thing, right? So you got these two things. War started on Amavasya, it is an 18-day war.
Yeah.
We can't have two different opinions on this.
But before you get into that, I also want to ask you that, there's another very popular theory which I also read and have heard about, which is, the fact that everyone says that there was a lunar eclipse which was out of turn, right? And it's basically, people tend to date it based on that lunar eclipse which was out of turn. And so they say that the Mahabharata was somewhere between 800 to 1200 BC, but of course you're dating it much, much earlier. And so I just want to understand, what is your explanation for that?
Okay, fantastic. So now, that's great of you that you've gone into that depth and actually looked into the pairs of eclipse pairs. So there have been authors who have gone into looking at pairs in the time of the Mahabharata. And you can go and look at eclipse pairs, and you'll see that there are numerous eclipses. Numerous. I mean, every year there will be effectively either 2 or 3 or 4 eclipses, right?
Yeah.
So if you go into it, then you have to go into whether they occurred at less than 14 days, less than 15 days, less than 13 days. Now, Mahabharata talks about a tradition of eclipses, but the interesting thing about the eclipses, which most of the authors have forgotten, and which is there in the text, is that when did the eclipses occur? Did they occur before the war started? Or did they occur in the war timeline, during the 18 days of the war? It's a very interesting thing. And if you look into it, the answer to that is, when did Vyasa meet Dhritarashtra? And Vyasa meets Dhritarashtra before the war and on the eve of the war. And then he relates the omens which are there in the Bhishma Parva and all that. And along with that, long before that, in the Udyoga Parva, Karna talks about a lunar eclipse which has taken place already. At the time of meeting Sri Krishna, he talks about a lunar eclipse which already took place, and a solar eclipse is about to occur. So, the eclipses have to take place before the war. And once you clarify that, you see, then most of these dates fall into real trouble, because those eclipses he's talking about are occurring before the war. You can argue that there might have been further eclipses occurring after, but then there is a problem, because you can't have eclipses occurring at such frequent intervals.
Right.
You see, so if you say that there was an eclipse occurring before the war, which is what Karna and Vyasa, two principal characters of the Mahabharata, are talking about, eclipses occurring, but before the war, then, and that is just, that is not massively before. You're talking about a gap of maximum maybe 40-50 days, like that sort of thing. Then in that case, how can you have an eclipse again at this point of time? So if you look at it, if you're talking about pair of eclipses having occurred before, so that is the first thing. And then the question is, which eclipse occurred before? And there also he says the lunar eclipse which occurred first, and then the solar eclipse. That is the other thing. And then of course there is the other peculiar problem, which is with astronomy software. When you go back into time, the moon is the thing which is not perfectly, you cannot position the moon. Okay. So there may be a difference of a few hours here and there. That's the only graha which is not so easy to position. So this will have occurred, but the only question is when exactly. Within a few hours there may be a difference, and plus then the question is the visibility of an eclipse and all that, right? So all those things are difficult questions, which actually you can, those will become more of an opinion. So to date the war on eclipses alone is actually, I think, a bit of a difficult thing to do, right? It is possible to do. And of course, there are 2 eclipses which take place before over here. And that is during the mission of, during and just after the mission of peace, right? So that is as far as the eclipses are concerned. Now, Dr. Achar also has dealt with very, very lucidly about the visibility of eclipses. Now, I'll come back to the pivotal moments of the Mahabharata now, because I think that's really, important from our viewpoint. So that day 13, so day 10 is of course, day 9, 10 is important from the fall of Bhishma point of view. But day 13 is really important because there is a Maryada Ullanghan. Because what has happened is, see, you got this young boy called Abhimanyu. And Abhimanyu has learnt the Shastras of the piercing of the Chakravyuha in the womb. But unfortunately, he hasn't learnt how to come out of it. But in this particular case, there is a Maryada Ullangan in the sense that normally one warrior will fight one warrior. But here they were incapable of fighting him alone. And even after 2 or 3 people joined and started to fight him, they could not fight him. And so eventually, after everything had been exhausted and he's exhausted and he's completely alone, then they all got together to kill him.
Yes.
And they killed him. And they all rejoiced at the end of that because they had managed to kill Abhimanyu. And that is, how can I put it? It's one of those events which causes severe trouble for the future. And of course, Arjun gets severely annoyed at this, and he's beside himself in rage and anger. He's uncontrollable actually, and eventually he takes that pratigya that I am going to kill Jayadratha no matter what happens. And well, we come to the 14th day, and then Jayadratha is killed eventually, as it is known, and his head goes and falls in his father's lap and all that, those sort of things. And then starts a merciless battle, because what has happened is, you see, you have gone past that Maryada. And now everybody is out to kill everybody else, on the other side. And there is no quarter to be given.
I mean, it's like a line that's been crossed, right? And once you just cross that line, then everything is acceptable.
Yes, unfortunately. And I mean, that is also true in other bits of life. Anyway. But Ghatotkach comes into the scene on the 14th war night. And Ghatotkach, because his head is like a ghata, so Ghatotkach is and it's completely bald, and he's fearsome. He's fearsome. He's a demon, right? At the end of the day, and he's born of Bhimsen and Hidimbi, and he comes there and he decides that he's going to take apart the entire Kaurava army. And he kills a couple of demons. And remember, in the night, Ghatotkach's powers magnify like anything. So eventually, Duryodhan is like worried that this whole thing is going to get over on this 14th war night, and Ghatotkach is just going to cause so much annihilation. So he tells Karna that, I know you have reserved your Vasava Shakti for Arjun, but this is a akasmak, a sankat which has come on us. So please use it to kill Ghatotkach instead. And of course, that is what happens. But before dying, Ghatotkach enlarges his body so much and kills a few more, Kauravas in the end. And Yudhishthir is in sorrow after that. Yudhishthir says, how many people are going to be killed by this and this sort of thing. But Sri Krishna smiles. And Sri Krishna smiles because he knows that Karna has lost his power. Karna has lost his biggest weapon, the Vasav Shakti. Yeah. And therefore Arjun is now safe. And if Arjun is safe, the war is going to be won no matter what. And this is just how wars play out. But after that, something very interesting happens. There's a merciless killing going on. Eventually, so the story goes, that they cannot even recognize it's a dark night. The moon has not risen yet, and they cannot recognize each other, and they are full of fatigue. So eventually, Arjun says that let us stop and rest, and then we'll start the fight again when the moon rises, right? And so they rest over there, and there is they also have torches and all those sort of things as well, but eventually so fatigued that they don't know what the hell they're doing. So eventually they go to rest on the battlefield itself. And then the moon is to rise. And that moon rise is really important because it clarifies our question, which we asked right in the beginning, that whether did the Mahabharata war start on Amavasya or not? If this is the 14th night, then on the 18th war day, it must be 4 days away. It has to be a Amavasya or a new moon night or close to it, new moon day or close to it, right? So it is either a Krishna Chaturdashi or Amavasya, right? So this becomes very interesting. So the war ends on Amavasya. The war cannot start on Amavasya.
Understood. There's enough proof in there.
Now there is enough proof. Now we know why they say war is in a late Shukla Paksha. The tradition says war is in late Shukla Paksha, either Shukla Ekadashi, Dwadashi, Trayodashi, depending. So the first war day becomes a Shukla Trayodashi, right? Late Shukla Trayodashi, and then before that will be a Dwadashi and so on. But whatever be the case, it's definitely not Amavasya. The war is ending on Amavasya. And that is a huge thing, because it means that there is some massive mistake which has been made by all these other astronomers.
No, I just want to also jump onto something else which has been also on my mind, which is, you said this about, Krishna Bhagwan, and, we always think about Kali Yuga starting when he passes away, or rather moves on to the brighter world. And so that's always, at least my understanding was, Kali Yuga started then. And you of course mentioned that that's not how it is in the Gita, that it has actually already begun. And so if that be the case, again my question is, so when is Kali Yuga going to end? Because if it's going to be ending soon, then human race will end soon as well. So where are we really compared to the human calendar and the cosmic calendar if you talk about Kali Yuga? Because each yuga is supposed to be around 4 lakh years, right? Something like that.
So 1432,000 is the duration of Kali Yuga, starting from 3102 BCE, supposedly. And I mean, there's no way to either confirm it or deny it. but that is the impossible length of time which the Hindus are talking about, right? Which we are talking about, these sort of lengths of time. So we are young into Kali Yuga, and things will get far worse apparently. So it's a good thing if we can manage to get out of this situation. At the end of our lives, hopefully it'll still be not as bad as it is supposed to get.
At least this lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, in our lifetime anyway, we can hope for reasonably good life, whatever is remaining. But I'm not sure, given all these conflicts and given what else has happened in the past few years, I think humans are looking at, they have to get the act together a little bit.
But what does that look like? I mean, I know we all say we should get our act together, but at a collective level, what does that look like? Because we are all only thinking about our individual needs, and that really is driven by our own motivations. And at a country level, it's driven by, motivations of the political leaders who are looking at, can I drive my specific country agenda? So, how do we really come at that collective consensus on what is good for the world? Because I don't think anyone's looking at it like that.
Well, the Americans have to reduce their footprint first of all, because I think 75% of that climate change footprint is American, right? The Americans really have to start thinking that what exactly are we doing to the world, and I think some of the red meat consumption has to go down, and has to go down a lot. And then, of course, we have to get over our obsession with cars. And more. There needs to be more public transport, and then there needs to be flood defenses, and there needs to be, because there's going to be some of the coastal areas. If you look at the forecasts, Bombay, for example, Bangladesh is going to be the worst hit, I think.
Yeah.
And all these things, when they happen, all these natural disasters which have been forecast, and you can already see that some of them have already started occurring. The problem is that once those occur, you can't do much about those. So everything has to be a protective thing. It has to be done beforehand.
This year or the last 2 years have been somehow we are seeing conflict propping up everywhere. Before that, we were all as a humanity struggling with COVID. And so yes, to your point that we are having different kinds of struggles in different years that we are looking at. But does that really have any astrological connection at all in the study that you've been doing?
Yeah, I mean, I try to avoid really getting into it because it's depressing, isn't it? But you see, the Mahabharata has got some very interesting things in it. And one of the things it has, so there are two verses for the position of Saturn in the Mahabharata. And they're very interesting that, so those verses are Prajapatyam hi nakshatram grahastikshno mahatyutihi shaneshchara pidayati pidayan praninodikam. That is one verse. And then Rohini pidayan nesham sthito rajan shaneshchara. The first verse is from Udyoga Parva, which is Karna Krishna Samvada. The other one is from Bhishma Parva. And Rohini Nakshatra and Saturn. Rohini is considered the Nabhi of the zodiac, of the world in a way. So if Saturn comes over there, and if you look at the way that particular nakshatra is positioned, you'll see that it's like a vein of a cart. And whenever Saturn goes to the vein of that cart, not exactly in it, basically, but somewhere around there, then disasters occur. And you can prove it. So if you go back to the last time it happened, the exact week when Saturn went retrograde, retrogression is basically simply from the geocentric point of view, from our viewership on Earth, it becomes important. But the moment it started to go into it, that retrogression, that was a point at which the Twin Towers episode occurred. The terrible tragedy of 9/11. Yeah. And then if you go back another 29 and a half years, then you'll find one of the biggest genocides of the country, which was completely forgotten. Biggest genocides of this, world, in fact, which is the Bangladesh, during the creation of Bangladesh, which was, 2 million people killed, and 400,000 women in rape camps. And, and of course, what's his name? Nixon, who threatened to put the 7th Fleet in the Bay of Bengal. And Indira Gandhi then, stopped all that and airlifted troops into what is now Bangladesh, what used to be East Pakistan. And eventually the whole thing stopped. That is the power of Saturn, right? Can literally stop everything. And that is what happened to the Germans in the end. The power of Saturn, basically, from the Jyotish point of view, to stop something from happening.
So is that what's happening now as well?
This particular thing happens every 29 and a half years. And every 29 and a half years, there is some other war or whatever. And it's usually some sort of thing which leads to a big war. Even if it isn't a war, but it's something which leads on to conflict. And that is happening, 2030, 31, that sort of time frame. So there is a bit of time for that. But now what is happening is, some other stuff is also happening. So in the context of for example, the Israel-Palestine conflict, so you go to October 7th and you cast the chart for that particular day, you'll find that Mars and Ketu, from our viewpoint, Ketu is headless. And Ketu is, so it's what leads to unpredictability of events and leads to, severe events, severe events, right? And it is without a head, right? So it can lead to some very, very violent events. And Mars and Ketu coming together, see, it potentiates the power of Mars as a planet of conflict. So it is a mathematical point, Ketu, but from our viewpoint, it is a graha. And the reason it is called a graha is because it can lead to some very, very severely violent events. And as I've always said, as a neutral Jyotish observer, because everything is ultimately karma. The problem is that once you got violent events which occur, then there's an action, there's a reaction, and then the whole thing goes in its own trajectory. So that one thing happened. And the interesting thing over there is that Israel's Lagna, or I can't remember whether it is Israel's Lagna or its moon, is exactly over there at the Mars Ketu conjunction. And that is a terrible thing, basically, for Israel.
You've spoken a lot about energy, and there's also a lot of talk on the internet. Often when I'm browsing, I find, a lot of talk around Kundalini and that you can achieve it in 21 days of practice. Can you just share some insight on what that really is?
Okay, so the first thing I'm going to say is that if anybody says they're going to awaken Kundalini in 21 days, run in the opposite direction as far as possible. I mean, I don't mean it in any bad way, and I don't mean any criticism, but having been there and done that sort of thing, it was just the other day when I was sitting in front of Nakhate Maharaj, my guru, and I said, oh, my Kundalini has come up to Vishuddhi, and I can feel something there, and I must have been 25 or something, and he laughed, he laughed at it, Bala, he said in Marathi, Jeva hoil tula kalel. When it happens, you will know it. It is not something like this, like what people think it is. Because Kundalini, what is Kundalini? Kundalini is you. Kundalini is you, but which you? You see? So, I am Manish, you are Pragya. Right. Now, I am Manish because there's the I-ness which identifies with this idea of Manish, right? Right. And you are Pragya likewise. XYZ. And everything you own, small things also, that is your I-ness. And that I-ness of yours is your identification. But now imagine that you take yourself and you imagine yourself as an aspirin tablet and you put it in the water. And it's a dispersible aspirin tablet. And it starts to dissolve. And that is what is Kundalini. That you start to become that water into which you put yourself. You're becoming that. And that is far more unlimited as compared to the aspirin tablet which you thought you were. And now you're basically becoming that jug of water or whatever it is. And so it's not unlimited, but it's still limited because it's not the ocean, but it is unlimited enough. And what happens with Kundalini is that the boundary between you and the universe will dissolve. And so now what happens is that depending on what deity you have worshipped to get into this really not so good thing, because unless you're trained to do it, it can be quite a deadly experience. And so either the universe will come in or you will go out. And it depends on which deity you worship as to which will do what. So in the initial bit when Kundalini actually awakens, so there are three consequences. One of three consequences can occur, or one of four. The first is that you will die. You just die, because what will happen is it will open and off you'll go, and the crown basically and this energy will just meet, and there will be a merging, and that will be the end. That is one. The second is that the awakening, because awakening is such a powerful thing. I mean, all these people who keep talking about 21-day awakenings, this is a load of utter nonsense. They have no idea what Kundalini is. Kundalini, if it actually awakens, you will be in a state of flux. And a lot of people go mentally deranged with that, right? Because you have to maintain brahmacharya. You have to, you can't eat certain foods. In the beginning, at least, you have to follow endless number of instructions. And those instructions are not easily available because hardly anybody has ever done it. These is such a rare thing for Kundalini to actually awaken. It is not something which is so common as people say. what people mistake to be Kundalini is emotional catharsis, some energy flowing within, which is just prana in one of the channels, things like that. Kundalini is, and if you, for some or the other reason, if you've awakened somehow some higher deity, and that deity is taken control of this limited person, which is you, then the third option is there, which is that you will eventually become like that. And not that you will become that completely, but you'll become some small replica internally of that deity. It could be Shiva or Vishnu or whatever it is, but a small portion of that is recreated within you. And that is what the greats like Swami Vivekananda or Ramakrishna Paramahansa. Ramakrishna Paramahansa was one of the greats who did that, but Dhaneshwar Maharaj. Dhaneshwar Maharaj did it when before the age of around 25 or 21, in fact. And you will experience, so whoever does that will experience the divine in some form or the other, and it will keep experiencing the divine, right up to the day they die. And even afterwards, there is no real death, because that death experience has already been recreated by that Kundalini.
When you go through that gateway, in a way. Oh, very interesting. I think what I'm taking away is, of course, most importantly, that if you're doing this, you have to have a guru. You have to have someone who can guide you through it, the right kind, who has experienced it. And I know in this day and age, like you said, where there's so much noise, it's very difficult to find the right person, because how do you make that judgment on who's right? And then the second thing is like, be very clear on what that is. So read about it before you actually want to experience it. Don't just go with the fad that because it's out there, it pops up on your feed. Just don't go click and start experiencing it, because it's something which can also actually have very negative repercussions. I also want to ask you, you spoke a lot about Hinduism, and the constant conversations that especially the young people in India and also liberals or pseudo liberals always talk about is the connection between Hinduism and Hindutva. So where is really, do you see a connection at all? Because we always see Hinduism as a way of life where we're very secular, we're open, we're accepting of everything. And so what is really the connection in your mind, if at all there is a connection?
See, Hinduism as it is today is formed of a huge number of paths, all of which have effectively begun in India. You can say Kundalini is one path, for example. The Bhakti movement is another part, for example. And each and every deity, for example, has its own path. I mean, so, but they're a group of paths, all which they all have their roots in India. And they all believe collectively in a set of beliefs. Even the Jains, for example, will believe in a certain set of beliefs which are not too dissimilar to the dharmic faiths, what we call as the dharmic faiths. Hindutva is also effectively just an outreach of that, but some of it may be more reactionary. That's about it. And in the old days, for example, you had Kshatriyas to protect so-called dharma. But now you don't quite need Kshatriyas as such in that particular context, right? Because in India you got a different kind of, you got the army and you got the navy and you got the air force and all that anyway to protect your borders. But the intellectual part of that is important. That you have to be able to give your point of view across, right? And to be able to do it without too much of a fight, unnecessary fight, where it is necessary sometimes to argue, but sometimes it is not necessary to argue, but to actually to make sure that you give to put your point across. That is more important sometimes. And also it's also about how many people you give this point of view to, right? And how many people you actually get them to practice. So if you got everybody to sit down and do asana, but asana meaning not physical poses, but you got them all to sit down and meditate. But before you meditate, you must learn to concentrate. But before you learn to concentrate, then you might want to learn what is dhyan. Then if you want to learn what is dhyan, then you might as well do homa. Then you see what I mean? So I realized it the hard way. I mean, I luckily have a, humongous powers of concentration from my early days. So I was lucky. But not everybody is like that. And fire can help you concentrate like anything. And once you learn to concentrate, then you've also learned, because what exactly is Hinduism? If you break it down completely, what is it? You go to a temple, that is Hinduism. You visit a temple and you sit there, you chant something, you ring the bell once or twice, right? And you take a little bit of akshata in your hand and you give it to the priest and please can you place it at the feet of the deity. You light a lamp over there. That is all Hinduism. But why are you doing it? Because that is a fire element, right? Then the kumkuma and the akshata, what is that? That is effectively something physical. Over there, you are giving the earth element. Why are you putting the pushpas? Because that is a water element. And then the agni is you see what I mean? And all that you're learning, the moment you do homa, you become aware of the whole damn thing. You become aware of the elements, you become aware of what, because that is an element, you see. And therefore you begin to learn about the other elements. Then you begin to learn about the chanting. So if that is what effectively Hinduism is.
So my other question to you is the little bit that I have read the Gita, there's no mention, or even the Mahabharata, right? There's no mention of a temple or idol worship. It's just about states and Krishna Bhagwan is talking about lessons of life, so to say. So where did this concept really come in?
Right. So first of all, the Gita, Bhagavad Gita, what I'm saying will sound a bit like blasphemy then, is not for everybody at a particular stage of their life. It's meant for you when you're really going to concentrate on it, and it's not something you just go for a weekend course on the Bhagavad Gita. You need to concentrate on the Bhagavad Gita, and when will that happen? When you're ready to receive that message. You need to be at a particular point in your life to actually resonate with those things. That is number one. And then you mentioned about why there is no Murti Puja supposedly advocated. But what it is the Bhagavad Gita is a field of thought. It is a stream of thought which has come out from a great yogi. So, if you're talking about Mantra Shastra, so here is Arjun, who has spent 12 years in the Himalayas. And he is the person who is receiving that knowledge from the Lord himself. You consider that Sri Krishna is Bhagavan. Now, Sri Krishna giving Arjun. And who are we? मतलब ऐसे ही अपना आते हैं ना लोग. तो मतलब I consider myself like that only because
we are the जनता.
हाँ, जनता भी नहीं बोल सकते, मतलब जनता भी कुछ हो सकती है, पर हम तो वैसा, it is not going to happen like that, right? I mean, we have to realize that these are two great exalted yogis, and now they have come to a pinnacle of their practice, and now spontaneously Sri Krishna has given something which is impossible. Read that Bhagavad Gita, you find that Oppenheimer read the Bhagavad Gita in Sanskrit. He learned Sanskrit to read the Bhagavad Gita in original. Mahatma Gandhi, on the other hand, did not read the Bhagavad Gita in the original Sanskrit. He read a translation. That is the difference. That is why you find that Oppenheimer went on to fight, you see, because
he create a bomb.
Yes, that is the reason why he went on to fight, because there was no other option, and that is what it eventually. So if anybody who reads the Gita will not necessarily go and fight or not necessarily create arms or whatever, but they will they will get up to struggle. They will start to struggle against injustice, oppression, those sort of things. So in that way, it is a very very powerful text.
So I want to wrap this up by asking you a question. I got to know, firstly, what's next for you and what are you currently working on? And then I also heard that you're planning to build a temple in India and you're trying to acquire land here near Varanasi. So please tell me more about that.
Yeah, so that's we have already, I think, effectively acquired the. It's not even land. We are going to acquire a entire place in Kashi Kshetra, and so we have already acquired that.
Wonderful.
Effectively, it should be finished this month, and so it comes with a temple. Actually, there is a temple attached to it. And so, what we are hoping is that there will be first there will be just one pratisthapana, but first the murti has to be made. That is going to be hopefully I think it will be Batuk Bhairava. Now the question is in what dhyana we have to make it, either sattva, rajas, or tamas. So we are going to do that. So that murti is going to be made now. Now that all this is already, in fact, we signed the paperwork just a few days ago, and that is in Kashi Kshetra itself, which was quite difficult to get. Then there's a few things to be done. The place needs to be mended a little bit and all that. Some marammat has to be done. Ground floor of that we are going to have the deity, and in the temple there will be another deity, and the temple already has I think 21 shivlingas.
Oh, and what's really the idea behind this?
So for years and years, so when I was around 27 or 28, I've had this idea for a long time that I want to build around. I wanted at that point to build around 18 temples, each reflecting one of the arms of Durga. That was the original plan. But then slowly, I mean, I should have perhaps done it at that stage. It was easier to do it at that stage, and people were willing to give me land at that stage. There was land possibly there as well, right? In Pune and other places, I would have easily got it. But I was quite lucky. The previous temple which we did was given to me by one of the people I know, quite a good friend, Avinash, and he had some land. And so in one corner of the land, there was already a Bhairav temple, Masoba temple, which is a form of Bhairav. And then at the side of that, we basically built a small shrine to Dhumavati. Dhumavati is one of the, so Dhumavati has 32 forms. And the normal form which is depicted in literature is the Smashanic form. But the form which we have built is the form which is the we were able to consecrate as a Saubhagyavati Dhumavati, which is the one worshipable in the temple. And that is the one which is seated on a crow. And that is in Pune, in the outskirts of Pune, in a taluka, in the Donge village. And it's quite spectacular. I mean, that particular deity, I must say, it's one of the most powerful protective deities of Hinduism.
Well, I hope more and more of that happens to you because you're doing some great work. And thank you so much for sharing so much of your knowledge. I think I have learned a lot around not only dating the Mahabharata, but also just generally about life. So thank you for sharing so many anecdotes of your journey. And I'm hoping to keep having these conversations with you. So thank you again for your time.
It's very kind of you, Pragya ji. Dhanyavad.
Thank you.